the thing that I find really extraordinary about what we see in young people, and I guess it is more Gen Z than millennials, is their levels of optimism. This is what really surprises me when we sort of talk to young people around the world. They're really optimistic. So despite, I think, a lot of what you hear a lot about intergenerational warfare, you hear a lot about that conflict, and you hear a lot about the challenges that are facing young people. And that's fine. I think we should talk about those challenges. But wherever I go, wherever we do the research, even when people are facing extraordinary hardship, economic hardship, conflict, things like that, you get this real sense of optimism, because you ask people, do you think your life will get better? What do you think about your life? Do you think your life is better than your parents? Are you optimistic for your future? Are you optimistic for getting a job? Generally really high levels of optimism. And that surprises me. And sometimes we ask why.
البارحة كان أكو مؤتمر يحكي عن الشباب، عن الديمقراطية، عن الحريات، بس اللي أثار فضولي هو دور الشباب. كل هاي القصة دور الشباب اللي هم راح يقودون المرحلة القادمة، دور الشباب اللي تقريبا أكو إهمال حكومي باتجاهه، أو يمكن حتى من عندنا إحنا كمواطنين، لأنه إحنا ما فاهمين شنو هم شباب، شنو هذا الجيل الجديد اللي يسموه next generation. هاي الحلقة راح تكون باللغة الإنجليزية مع صديقتنا كريستين، عالمة اجتماعية وخبيرة في شؤون الشباب.
Hello.
Hi, Christine.
Hello.
How you
Nice
doing?
to be here.
So, first thing I always hit the question from the core of the object. So, what is the next generation?
Okay, Next Generation is a research project, a programme that the British Council has run since 2009, so that's 15 years. It's worked in over 20 countries. So in that time, we've engaged with tens of thousands of young people in countries including Poland, Germany, Colombia, Ethiopia, Nigeria, Vietnam, Indonesia, Lebanon, Turkey, and now Iraq. We're welcoming to the family. So we look at three main areas, or we say we have three purposes for doing the research. One is listening to young people. We want to hear what they have to say about their lives, about their values, about their aspirations, about the challenges they face and what they need to overcome those challenges. And then we say we want to give them a platform to share those views with the people around them who make a difference, but also with each other, because the more countries we have, the more we feel we have a global community of young people. And then we want to take those views, that evidence, and take that to policymakers, take it to the people who can make a difference for young people. Not so they can do anything for them, but they can actually help them, facilitate them in order to make the change that we know young people want to make. So I think it's great that Iraq is now joining this family of young people around the world. We spoke to over 1,000 young people across the country, again, about their hopes, about their aspirations, about what they want to see in their lives and what we need to do to make that happen.
Great. Let's get to know you better.
Okay.
Make people listen better, because they should know who is the speaker. So I hear you have a podcast.
I do.
Yeah. And also you are doing research.
Yes.
And I want you to describe yourself professionally.
Okay, I'm the Director of Research and Insight at the British Council. So that's my job title. It probably tells you a little bit about what I do, but maybe not that much. So I'm based in the UK. I'm based in Edinburgh, in Scotland, the north of the UK. But I have a global role, which is a great pleasure for me, because it means I get to be here and I get to be meeting people, you and young people here, as well as around the world. I manage a team of people, and we work in research across arts, across education, across language learning, across areas around civil society and democracy and so on. But most importantly, my team is there to help my colleagues around the world with the British Council understand what they're doing, learn from what they're doing, and most importantly, share that knowledge, share that learning with others so that we can do our work better. Wherever we are, we can make better programs, better strategies, but also so we can share that with the people that we work with. So that could be governments, it could be teachers, It could be young people and the civil society organisations they work with, all in order to share knowledge so that we can all do that a little bit better.
Did you do that in your podcast, sharing knowledge?
Yeah, so the podcast is quite new. I don't know how long you've been doing podcasting, but
1 year and a half.
1 year, okay, so that's much, much longer than me. I think the idea for us was twofold, really. Firstly, for us, actually, back in 2020, when COVID happened, I wasn't quite in the role I'm in now, but I worked in the research team. And I was always talking about how you share research, how you share knowledge a bit more effectively. Because sometimes I think we can be a little bit old-fashioned. So, you know, you do some research and, you have your report and you give it to people. You put it on the website and give it to people, and then it's done. But that's often not how we communicate. That's not how we learn. Not always. It's not the only way. So I love podcasts. So I like podcasts when I'm cooking, because I love to cook, or when I'm going out for a walk, or when I'm at the gym. I listen to music or I listen to podcasts. They're really they're perfect timing for when you go out for a walk, and they give you something to think about. So I had said back in 2020, why don't we have a British Council podcast? We have so many interesting stories from around the world. Why are we not sharing these? Anyway, it didn't happen. And eventually, when I became the director of the team, I said, right, I think we should do a podcast, and I think we should do one based on research. So with this podcast that I do, it's called Our World Connected, and we're just in our first series. So we started recording in February, and the first episode started to come out in April. So I'm very, very new. We're doing 12 episodes, and each one is based on a theme and a piece of research that we have. So, for example, episode 10, which will come out in August, is all about young people and participation. And it's really based off the fact that we have Next Generation Iraq. We have an Iraqi guest on that podcast, as well as an Indonesian guest, both young people talking about how they're making a difference in their communities. So I see podcast for me has been about how we can bring research to a much, much wider audience, and to also be where they are. So instead of expecting them to come to the British Council website or expecting them to pick up a piece of work, I've got something that they can listen to in their own homes, or when they're out for a walk, what have you.
One of my episodes is a man says that it's time for educated people to be on the screen. I heard you when you say we should share knowledge and research. And also I see a lot of authors have very famous books, did a podcast to explain a lot of things to people, and sometimes to reach people fastly than the books did. So when you talk about youth or next generation or Gen Z, what's the extraordinary thing in them? There's something different.
The thing that I find really extraordinary about what we see in young people, and I guess it is more Gen Z than millennials, the age group we're working with, is their levels of optimism. This is what really surprises me when we sort of talk to young people around the world. They're really optimistic. So despite, I think, a lot of what you hear a lot about intergenerational warfare, you hear a lot about that conflict, and you hear a lot about the challenges that are facing young people. And that's fine. I think we should talk about those challenges. But wherever I go, wherever we do the research, even when people are facing extraordinary hardship, economic hardship, conflict, things like that, you get this real sense of optimism, because you ask people, do you think your life will get better? What do you think about your life? Do you think your life is better than your parents? Are you optimistic for your future? Are you optimistic for getting a job? Generally really high levels of optimism. And that surprises me. And sometimes we ask why, maybe there's a conflict going on, or maybe you've had problems with your education. But they genuinely seem really, really empowered to go, I am going to grasp hold of my life and I will make the most of those opportunities. I will go out and find them. I will make my own way in the world. And that's really inspirational, and that's one of the things I would think keeps me going and keeps us at the British Council going and keeps many of my colleagues going. It's to capitalise on that level of optimism and hope and commitment to making a better world. And I have to be in awe of that, to be honest. So
you did your research in 20 countries.
More than 20 countries
More
now,
than
yes.
20
Don't
countries.
ask me to name them all, but yes, more than 20.
So once I heard that all Generation Z are raised in the same environment, and that environment is social media.
Uh-huh.
Did you see that all of the Gen Z are familiar in all the world? Same struggles?
Yeah,
same problems?
mainly. I mean, I think I can't remember what the latest figure. I never quite get this right. I know this. I think more than 60% of the world, at least, is online. There are certain areas where we probably overstate it, and you realise even if you say 66% of the world is online, that means 1/3 of the world actually isn't. But yes, you've got a generation of people who maybe don't have laptop computers, but you know they have a mobile phone or they share a mobile phone. They can use data. So what, in terms of the impact that we see that is universal, or as universal as we can look at, I think you've got people, this is certainly true in Iraq, where they see social media and digital platforms in general as a way of engaging with each other, a way of communicating, a way of mobilising, sometimes a way of being able to find ways to be active, maybe to protest, but certainly to be active and to organise and to make change. And that's the same in the UK, I think. I think you see that people are concerned. I remember when in 2016 we did a Next Generation in the UK, and people were really aware then of this idea about echo chambers, that once, you know, algorithms on Twitter or X or whatever, when you go into them, they start telling you, you know, what you're already reading. They just reinforce what you already know. They give you the views that you want to hear.
Keep in the same place.
So people were really aware 8 years ago, I think, of the ideas about echo chambers, and that hasn't gone away. So there was a real demand for digital literacy. They said, you know, we know this, but it's hard for us sometimes to be able to understand how to assess the information that's coming at it. There's so much information. So they were saying actually it would be a really good thing to have more education in schools on that. Increasingly, you see people much more aware of artificial intelligence and generative AI and the issues that they have for what they read and what they see now even. So again, they're asking for more digital literacy. You see teachers increasingly asking to say, if we're going to deal with this in the classroom, we need to be able to understand how to parse this, how to deal with this information, how to help our students. We've seen particular issue for women and girls engaging in social media. There is now a sort of gendered form, or a sort of digital form of gender-based violence. So women and girls who are much, much more likely to be abused or get abused online, get harassed online, sometimes get inappropriate images sent to them, sorts of forms of sexual harassment that are particularly gendered. So there's a dimension there, I think, people have to deal with as well. So I think that there are definitely common threads of both the positives and the negatives. But you know, this digital age isn't going away. You know, it's here to stay. So it's something we have to deal with. And again, those of us who maybe have a little bit of influence over policy, over education, need to be really, really mindful of, even if it's not our world, even if we don't feel particularly well up to speed on these things. You know, I'm reasonably digitally capable, but you know, I don't use TikTok. I'm far too old. So I think there is an onus on older people as well, like me, to be a bit more familiar so that we can support a younger generation when they ask for that support.
How much powerful that the countries will have if they have the young people more than elders? And as you know, and I don't know how much percentage in Iraq, that the young people are maybe higher than 60%.
I think so, yeah.
And how much powerful is giving us that? And how can we deal with that?
Yeah, so it should be hugely powerful. People used to talk about this idea of a demographic dividend. It was a big thing. People used to talk about this in Africa as well, where you have a huge youth population. It's not a phrase I really like, and I will just tell you why. It's because I think it always smacks slightly of exploitation. I think that the attitude we take with Next Generation and overall with our work with young people is not just to see young people as an asset to be exploited, right? They're not just there as an economic asset for any country. That's fine, they can be, but they're not just there to make the country a better place, you know, for older people and pay their pensions. So I'm always a bit cautious about saying demographic dividend. But on the other hand, I think a country that has a large, youthful, innovative, driven, passionate population is in a winning position if it uses them effectively and appropriately. So if it works with them. I think the danger is if you have a large youth population that's unhappy and that's disaffected, they will leave, or they will be unhappy and they won't engage, or they could be problematic. So it's almost, and the onus, I guess, is to say, why would you not want to harness the goodwill of those young people who talk all the time? And this is common across all the pieces of research. The young people we talk to are often really proud of their country, they're really committed to their country, they want to make their country a better place, and they are really frustrated that they're not being allowed to, they're not being supported to, they're being ignored. So I think any country that wants to harness that potential power of their young people means that the policymakers, the politicians, the people with power, the business leaders need to go to them, with an open heart, with a degree of integrity, being prepared to be accountable for it and saying, we want to work with you. We can see how much you're proud of your country and you want to make it better. Let's see what that looks like. What do you need? What can we do to help you to do that? Because again, why wouldn't you? When young people are thriving and succeeding, when they're being educated, when they're starting businesses, when they are helping to tackle some of the major environmental issues, that can only be a good thing. That's a good thing for a country. It's a win-win situation.
So that's the same thing that you were speaking about yesterday in the conference, I believe. So I want you to take a few time to speak about the conference, what did you speak about, and there is a highlight points you speak about, and also there is in conclusion maybe, and what did you see?
Well, I think I did speak about some of the things I've just said then. I think one other thing, and I'll sneak this in now because I didn't get the chance to say it yesterday. So I talked a lot about, that importance for youth political participation, for political parties to take young people seriously, actually in terms of governance and leadership, not just as a sort of youth wing, but actually to bring the young people right into the heart of the party and say, bring you in as decision makers. You are the people that own the future. But as has been pointed out to me before, and as was pointed out by our colleague, I think a couple of days ago, young people are not just the future; they are also the present. They do have a stake in the now. So I think all of those things need to be done. The thing I didn't have the chance to say, because it was a very busy day and a packed panel, was young people potentially have this really important role to play in peace building. Kind of goes back in a way to the digital point, and it comes back to something that was said in 2016, because you've got this really digitally engaged group of young people around the world who are on social media platforms. They are much more interconnected with each other in a way that my generation wasn't and generations previously weren't.
Of course.
They see the world really differently. And one of the young people in the UK said, I shall misquote him, but he said, we don't see borders like you do, that we don't really understand the world in terms of borders, because if they're, I presume, I don't do this, but if they're gaming, they can be gaming online with people from Denmark or South Africa or Brazil, wherever. So their world looks really different. I didn't get to meet people like that. So they feel differently about it. And so because I think they see the world differently, their role in terms of as peace builders can be really important. Everywhere we go, you see that they're less interested in sort of tribal affiliations. And I mean that in the broadest way possible. They're not really interested in these sort of tribal affiliations that maybe previous generations were. They just see the world really differently. They are very passionate often about their country. They do have a sort of sense of national pride, but they are much, much more global. So I think some of the older conflicts and sources of conflict confuse them also. They're sort of baffled by why these things are still going on. So I think if you harness that sense of global citizens with all this passion and energy, again, I think it can be a real win for the country. I know yesterday one of the other speakers talked about, the amount of money that has to be spent in Iraq and in other countries on security issues, and if some of that money could be invested into education, the difference that would make. So there is a flip side to say, if you can harness those young people as peace builders and have to spend less on security, then you're going to have that money going back into education, and you will have a positive circle there. What else did I see at the conference? Lots of, I mean, for me it was great. The opening few speakers were all really, really aligned with what I was saying and with what we say in Next Generation. Capacity building for young people, building their confidence, building their connections, and obviously that's what we're all about. I think people were quite firm but fair in terms of, again, saying you can't be you can't be mealy mouthed. I don't know how well that translates, but you can't be sort of do half measures when it comes to engaging young people in democracy and political participation. They're going to get involved in some way. They're going to want to make change. So let's do this with a bit more integrity. And I think the other thing that really struck me was there were some very high level people there, and that tends to imply that there is commitment to young people, and I hope that stays on. And I was delighted to be part of it, and I hope to be part of it again. I said I would happily come back and speak again about what we're doing, about what other people are doing, and how we're making progress.
Great. Yesterday in the second event, I heard someone of the youth says that we have freedom, but we don't have a democracy. So my question is, how much the democracy can play a role in the connecting youth with the older and with the work, with the stakeholders, take part to build a country maybe?
Yeah. I mean, it's a really interesting question, and I'm sorry I didn't hear more of the conversation about that. It feels quite a timeless and timely question and point to raise. I think so. Democracy looks different in different places, and I think that's a really important point. That a democracy in Iraq maybe isn't going to look the same as democracy elsewhere. I think the point why people want it, why people fight for it and strive for it, is because democracy makes you feel you have a stake in your society, and everyone deserves to have a stake in their society. Everyone who's affected by decisions and laws and policies should be able to have a say in that. I think democracy is complicated. You can look at them, there could be thousands probably of different systems out there in the world, and I'm sure none of them is perfect. And democracy also, when we talk about democracy, you're not necessarily just looking in sort of federal political terms. You could look at the different sorts of democratic institutions, different democracy in the workplace, democracy in the home. I think the most important thing is to know that young people have a stake in their society, and that they feel their voices are heard and taken seriously equally among those of others. And that they have the freedom to do so. So I think it's good to hear that they feel they have freedom, and how that freedom then translates into a democracy that works for Iraq, I think maybe is the next step.
We feel that we lost that identify the democracy actually. So how is the democracy in the West world? So we can understand it.
But I think the thing is, it looks different in lots of different countries, and again, I think it's really important. The business I'm in, we talk about cultural relations. We look at cultural nuance, and actually, culture is really, really important when it comes to any major system, any policy. So you would never want just to go, well, here's what here's what democracy likes in the UK. Try this, because it doesn't necessarily work. It's not culturally appropriate. Funnily enough, the very first episode of the podcast I did, my podcast, Are Well Connected, we talked about why culture is really important for sustainable development and the sustainable development goals, the global goals that are guiding major issues of our time around poverty, around climate change, around gender equality and so on. And said you can't just impose what someone in the global north or the west thinks is going to work. You can't just transport that and say, well, this will work for you, because it might not take account of their values, it might not take account of language, it might not understand the cultural background of where people have come from. And that would be the same with democracy. So I can't answer that question, because I could tell you about the system in the UK, and there are different systems in the UK. I live in Scotland, so we have our system is called devolution, slightly different to what you have here. So we have a Scottish Parliament, and then there is the Westminster Parliament, and they have different powers. They have different ways of being voted in, different sorts of representation. that have just emerged. None is perfect. No one is perfectly happy with it everywhere, and people complain constantly. I think the main thing is, do you have the opportunity to have a say about the way your country is run, alongside all of your brothers and sisters in the country? Do you have the opportunity to engage possibly with political representatives? How can you make your voice heard at the ballot box, but where else? How can you feel you can make a difference locally, nationally? The interesting thing that we do see in the UK and a number of other countries is, despite the fact that young people are often a little bit cynical, sceptical maybe, about formal politics, voting, things like that. You often see quite low voter turnout with young people. They are really passionate about bigger political issues, issues that maybe are more global, issues like climate change or gender equality, issues that cross borders. So we're back to this thing, I think, again, about young people not being all about the borders. And they are differently politically active. So they maybe don't go out to vote because they feel a bit disenchanted with that, but they do engage in protest, peaceful protest. They do engage with campaigning. They do engage with looking for other ways to make change.
So did any youth protest happen in the same time that we have in Tishrin in the world? There's something in common?
I can't answer about the timing because I know that's coming up to, this is 4 or 5 years ago, isn't it? I don't know about the timing, but there certainly are. We've seen youth protests and campaigns in the UK around higher education and the cost of higher education and about the way that higher education is run. You would have youth protests about climate change and climate change movements. You would have youth protests around, I think some of the way that our big systems and institutions are run in the UK. But I mean, not just in the UK, all around the world. I think young people often do find a way to collaborate, to campaign, to make change, because they see change often happen slightly more quickly.
It was from youth?
Yeah. Yes. But interestingly, sometimes you'll find ones in higher education where it is youth, but it's not just youth. Sometimes their teachers will come out with them. Sometimes their parents. It really all depends. It goes campaign to campaign.
So I heard you speaking about sustainable. Some friend asked me once that we have a new term came up, that sustainable, with any word we can say sustainable. I want you to explain sustainable, because someone like me working with the organization, foreign organization, global work, so I can understand it, but not like from expert, because I know a few things about it.
I mean, you may have picked up on something here that maybe people just say sustainable all the time. I wish I could remember the exact phrasing, so I'm going to try and quote, or probably misquote it. Basically, when you talk about sustainable development, which is kind of where we started, there was, back in the 1970s, I think it was 1972, there was something called the Brundtland Commission. They tried to define sustainable development, and they basically said it's a development that meets the needs of today without compromising the needs of tomorrow. So how do you support your generation, and not just young people, how do you support people today to thrive without compromising the future and the needs of people in the future? And people would say now we're not doing that. Industrialization, all these things have meant many people are thriving now. People are better off than they were before, but we have left an awful lot of problems for people in the future. So broadly, to be sustainable is can something be sustained? Can it last, or will it just be for a really short space of time? And so I think people talk about sustainable energy, sustainable development, so that people can be economically better off, but without burning down the forest, basically, which means in 50 years' time people have nowhere to live, or they have no fuel, or they have no shelter. So I think sustainability is it is key to everything. We talk about it, at the British Council, we talk about it in terms of projects. Is this project sustainable? Do we have enough people? How long will the funding last for? Do we have the materials? Do we have ways of measuring it? It's a project that only lasts for 1 year. It might be good for a year, but it won't necessarily have the impact. So we often talk about how to make things sustainable so that you can keep doing good. So you've got this big way of looking at sustainable development globally, which is how you ensure that people today can thrive, can be drawn out of poverty, can claim their rights, can live good, fulfilled, happy, active lives, but by not compromising future generations.
So I believe this is your second time in Iraq.
It is.
Can you describe the first look and how did you see Baghdad and Iraq?
So first time I was here, I was only in Baghdad. And I was here for 3 or 4 days, and we were starting the research. So I was at the University of Baghdad, and I was at a few other places. I got interviewed a lot, very different to this, lots of microphones, lots of short interviews. And it was, that was brilliant, because it was brilliant to see people were really interested. That's never happened to me before. I've never gone anywhere and people have been that interested in anything, I have to say. So that was fun. I was trying to pretend I was a football manager. I was going, right, this is what I'll be like when I'm the manager of Liverpool. And I met lots of lovely young people. I met lots of brilliant women. It was really thrilling. And it was great to be here because you will probably understand this. Iraq is somewhere in the West, it's kind of somewhere you hear about on the news. And it's often that's been for the wrong reasons. Often it's been about conflict. But I'm also really aware. I did classical studies when I was younger. I'm aware of Iraq's place in history, its place in cultural heritage of the world. So it was rather thrilling to be here. And then to realise how I'm not great with big cities, I'm not great with traffic, but I got a really nice feeling of Baghdad. My colleagues are brilliant and I had a lot of fun. I ate really well. I don't talk about this very much on the podcast, but basically my life centres around food. So I was really thrilled to be fed very well while I was here. And I was also in May, so it was a little bit cooler and a little bit easier for me to deal with because I live in Scotland where it's cold. So coming back this year, it's been hot, but I also got to go to Erbil the first time, which was really interesting, and that was lovely to see. It reminded me slightly more of Edinburgh, so a slightly calmer city, calmer traffic. In Edinburgh, we also have in the middle of our city like a bit of a mountain with a castle on the top. So it felt a little bit, when I saw the citadel at night, it felt a little bit like looking at Edinburgh. But then I was told, it's such an ancient site, and it's one of the most ancient sites in the world. And again, that sort of brings me back to being really awestruck by Iraq and its place in the world and its place in world history and culture. So the other thing that's been lovely coming back to Baghdad, apart from getting to go and talk to all these interesting people and talk about the research, which is just coming to its conclusion, is I made my second visit today to the Iraqi Museum. And it's such a privilege. And I'm quite stunned by the fact that I've now been there twice. And it's a place very few people in the UK have ever got to see. And they haven't got to see these extraordinary artifacts, these sort of little tablet of the Dream of Gilgamesh. And these very ancient statues and of the Assyrian and the Hattrian parts of Iraq over time, and these extraordinary artifacts. So I feel really blessed. It's quite emotional for me to be here. And this office is great. The team here is like a big family. So I have already been planning with colleagues my next visit, inshallah, next year. And to see a bit more.
Great. Well, a lot of visitors came to Iraq, and YouTubers. The first thing they speak about is food.
Oh yeah, well, yeah. I'm sorry. It is one of the many brilliant things about working for the British Council. So when I get to travel, my local colleagues take me for lovely food. So I've eaten very, very well over the last few days. I'm always very thankful. I have been to the gym as well, but I have mainly been eating, yeah.
In your visit, you have met few youth people, and so what's your impression about the Iraq and people in Iraq, and also how can we benefit if you have specify a couple of problems or something to maybe needing to improve?
So I guess I'd be quite cautious in answering that, just because I haven't been here very long. These have been 2 quite short trips, a year apart. I have met lots of people, but yeah, I'd be cautious about how much I would say on that, just because I think I wouldn't want to just. It would be very first impressions, I guess, in a way. I'm not sure I could give you that much depth in my answer, but yeah, I've met younger people and I've met some very impressive, policymakers and so on. I get this real sense of this real energy and drive, and people seem to be optimistic in the face of continued challenge. I wouldn't want to sort of sugarcoat this and say, look, everything's fine. I know there's still quite high youth unemployment, for example, but I do get quite a sense of thriving and a sense of people pulling together. One of the really nice things in the research, just the amount of young people in Iraq who said they felt really proud of their country. They're proud of the language and they're proud of the culture and the heritage. And that pulls people together, in a way that few other things do. And I haven't seen it quite that extent in a number of other countries. So I think that's something that's really special for Iraq and something to be proud of. So I guess in terms of how people can benefit, I would say build on that sense of pride, that even if young people are interested in being connected to the wider world and they want to travel and they want to study, or they want to make their way in their own world, they have a real deep love and pride for the country, and that's something that an older generation should build on. Invest in culture, invest in museums, invest in language, invest in education. None of this is particularly new, but I mean that's what I would say. Read the research. When the research comes out, read it and engage with it and really listen and understand, and try and understand what is driving that data. Try and understand what is behind what young people are telling us. Yeah, that's probably all I'd want to say, because I don't want to sort of sweep in here after having spent 10 days in Iraq in 2 years and try and give the opinion of an expert, because I'm not. But it's something I would feel really strongly about, and it's something I'm really looking forward to working with my colleagues on.
So I want to jump to the podcast experience. You said that you have not long experience with the podcast, but you have an opinion about the podcast in UK or in the West World. So how did you see that experience?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I thought podcasting was something to do. I think we came to it slightly later than we should have, because podcasts have been up and running for a while now, and they're changing and morphing. I'm acutely aware that this one is being filmed. I don't do that. Our one is audio only. This makes me very uncomfortable because I'm thinking, what does my hair look like? I wave my arms around all the time.
You're used to it, actually.
No, I'm not. I said we just do audio. I'm normally
not
just
in the first time.
I'm just sitting there with my cans on, and I don't do that. But podcasts are great, and I think it's been a lot of fun. It's been a real learning journey for me. So when I was younger, and I do mean quite a long time ago, when I was a student, I did student radio. I hosted a student radio program with some friends, and I liked that a lot. And I was a journalist for a while. Before I came to the British Council, I was a sort of political civil society journalist, and I interviewed people, and I was quite used to doing that. But then podcasting, as you will know, is a really different experience, because it's much more informal, it's much more conversational. It's more like, us sitting here having a chat. But you also have to listen in a different way. You have questions, you have a script, you're trying to guide through a kind of arc of a conversation. So you've been doing it longer than me and are clearly very skilled at it. I've definitely had to learn. And I can hear, we've released 7 episodes of the podcast now. I think I'm getting better as a host. Yeah. I hope I'm getting better at a host. I think I'm getting better. The first one, I can tell when I listened to it, I was a little nervous.
I cannot tell you about my first one.
I don't believe that. You're still here. I'm pretty sure you've got many, many more followers than I do as well, but that's great. So I'm in awe of you for doing that. And you've done this setup here. I'm always in my little studio. I do mine from my house. So next to my bedroom, I have a tiny little cupboard study. So I'm in there with my microphone and my laptop. And I've never done one of these face-to-face, I should say. Uh-huh. Mine are always online, because often we're talking to people who, I'm in the UK, and then I'm talking to someone who might be in Kenya or Brazil or Yemen or somewhere. So, yeah, it's been an interesting journey. This is actually only the second time I've been interviewed on a podcast as well. So this is also new.
That's an honor for me, actually. You know, the podcast experience in Iraq and all the Arabian world is new.
Uh-huh.
But sometimes people scared from the anything new. They heard that, especially because it is an individual experience. And after a few time, when the podcast gets success, and that the TV channel came after it and doing a lot of podcasts, but you know, TV channel do it in their way.
Yeah.
In the exact time, 1 hour or less, and in the agenda, a lot of things, and putting a lot of money on it. And my point of view is that all the TV shows are failed to provide a good podcast, and all great podcast in Arabian world is from individual.
Yes.
And because it is started as an individual experience, and you cannot put an agenda on it. It is individual, and if you don't like this person, don't say it. And if you like it, you're welcome. And that's the amazing thing about the podcast experience.
Well, they say, I think someone told me when I was trying to learn to do this, they said they'll come for the content, but they'll stay for the host. And it should be quite individual. It should be like having a conversation. I was told to imagine that I was, that I'm just having a chat with like I am with you, and that to imagine that the people who are listening are, so we would say in the pub, but you could say, in a cafe or somewhere like that. They're just maybe at a table and they're just sort of overhearing the conversation, and you're sort of aware of them. So it's quite intimate. And I think you're right. I mean, you see lots of big podcasts now in the UK and across in America and in Europe. You see lots of big corporate ones. The BBC does sort of podcasts as well. And, I think sometimes they can be great. They can work really well, I think, when people are skilled at it. But there's something quite intimate about just the art of having a conversation and just trying to bring a few people along with you. I think it's great.
And sometimes people speaking about rules of podcast, there is no rule actually.
Yeah.
Because the best podcast is that must look like you.
Yeah, exactly.
That's you. Don't wear a mask, don't do anything.
Exactly.
And I put a slogan for my podcast that no matter who, but what.
Okay.
But in Arabic, it will be poetic.
Okay.
Because I always want to focus on the object, not to make me run after the famous people.
Yeah.
And I wrote it in the home to remind myself always think.
Content, yeah.
That's the temptation of likes and shares, and maybe it will drag you with the famous people.
Yeah,
and
somewhere
you
you
will
don't want
lose
to go. Yeah.
your value. So I want to ask about your hobbies, not podcast.
Okay. I think as I've talked quite a lot about already, food. I love cooking. I love shopping for food. I made my colleague Salman take me to go shopping for honey and tahini while I was here, and spices and nuts. And so wherever I go, I always go into a supermarket. So whichever country I visit, I want to go to a supermarket, preferably a market as well, because I like to see I think a supermarket tells you a lot about how people live and what they like and what they buy. I think Iraqis have really sweet tooth, just from the amount of sweets I've seen since I've been here.
We used to get a lot.
Yeah. Food, cooking, eating, number one. I'm very boring. I'm not a young person. I'm quite boring. So I do Pilates. I don't know if Pilates is the big thing here, but Pilates is a bit like yoga. So I do like a bit of exercise. I like to walk. I am boring everyone in all my friends at the moment, because again, it's definitely a thing about my age. I go to the gym. I lift weights. I lift weight, not like really heavy weights, but I like to lift weights. So people are always hearing about my personal best every week and what I deadlifted this time and how proud I am of myself. So a bit of fitness countered with the eating. So, fitness on one hand, eating on the other. I walk a lot. I live in Scotland, which is very beautiful. So I live in a very beautiful city, but you don't have to go far out of Edinburgh. You can go up into mountains, or you can get down to the sea. I like long walks. Podcast. I read. And obviously I've gone blank now because I can't think of any books. My sister has 2 daughters as well. My sister has 2 little girls, so I'm an auntie, and I quite enjoy being an auntie to my little nieces, and being the cool auntie. So they'll be getting a few little gifts from Iraq, so they'll be delighted. That makes me sound terribly dull. I don't do anything. I'm not good at painting. I can't draw. I can't sew. I wish I could. I'd love to be more creative. I haven't quite found what my creative thing is yet. I play the guitar badly. So, that makes me sound terribly dull, but afraid so. That's me.
So you speak about reading. So what can reading give a person?
Oh, well, I was really lucky. My father, God rest him, was really passionate about books. So from a very, very young age, he had a house full of books, and he read to me, and then he got me into reading. And it stays with you all of your life. And I can tell when I'm feeling a bit miserable, or I'm feeling a bit ill, or I'm a bit stressed, and I don't read. And then I think your world closes in on you a little bit. So I think reading, particularly for children, but for all of your life, is something that's quite extraordinary. Some of those first books I read as a child are still really burnt into me. I can still remember whole sentences of what I used to read. It can open up worlds. It can transport you. And, I'm sure people have said this before, but I have a book group. There's another hobby. I have a book group with a group of women, and we meet once a month, and one of us cooks, and we have dinner, and we drink wine, and we talk about the books, and we talk about our lives, and that's a great joy. It kind of takes you out of your world. But I think books can transport you, really, other worlds, other countries, magical places, and it can just take you out of your life for a little bit. And I think sometimes it's really important, if you have a busy job or a busy life, to be able to get out of that life for a moment, to get out of your head and go somewhere else and just forget where you are, is a blessing. And I think it's good for your education, but I think it's really good for your mental health as well.
Great. So in the last, I want to explain something to hit my last question.
Okay.
My podcast called Stories in Arabic, Qasas. And I call it stories because the first creative thing that I did when I was young is writing my first short story and published it on the newspaper. So it was my first achievement.
Uh-huh.
And also I like to hear people's story and experience. I feel like it's feeding my mind, my imagination, and a lot of things. So what is the story that you want to write about you when you leave?
Oh, man. I don't know. I feel that's something other people should tell me. I should leave, and then people can tell me what story they're telling me. When I leave this life, or when I leave Iraq?
When you leave this life.
This life, okay.
I think that's explaining.
Yeah.
The answer will explain our goals, what we want to achieve. So that's the story I want people to talk about.
Yeah. I think probably like a lot of people, I'd like to think, I'd done a small amount of good in the world. And I think what else can you really want for? I'm not an ambitious person, right? And I realise now I'm in a good job, and I'm in quite a senior job, quite a big organisation. Which is still a bit of a surprise to me sometimes when I wake up. I didn't quite plan it like this. I don't think I had an ambition to be where I am now. Even when I was in the British Council, I've been in the British Council for 20 years. I think when I joined, I was quite junior. I didn't see a pathway. I didn't map it out. I'm always slightly in awe of people who manage to do that. They say, right, in 2 years' time I'll be here, and the next 2 years' time I'll be here, and then I'll get married, and then I'll do this. I haven't done any of those things. I like being interested. I like being content and feeling that I'm doing something useful. I don't think I ever wanted to make lots of money. I didn't want to go and work in a bank or go and work in the city, and I'm not very good with mathematics, so that probably wouldn't have worked. I was very passionate about languages. My father was English and my mother is Irish, and I grew up in England. So I had a slightly different view in the world, even though those two countries aren't very far apart. I had a slightly mixed cultural upbringing, and I always think maybe, even that slightly different view on the world and getting to see the world through the eyes of others might have made a difference. I wanted to be a writer when I was younger. I decided I wanted to work as a cabin crew, I think, because I decided I wanted to travel, and I thought that's how you travelled. But I don't like flying, so I probably shouldn't do that. And then I was a journalist. I worked for a record company. I sort of fell into my role, but through being curious. This is the thing. I think I'm curious about the world. I think I'm curious about ideas. Mm-hmm. One of the reasons I've never had a really fixed career is because I'm interested in too many things. So I'm interested in history, I'm interested in languages, I'm interested in psychology, I'm interested in sociology, and I can't do just one of them. So interestingly, my job now allows me to look at lots and lots of different things and to try and facilitate lots and lots of different research. So I'd like people to think I was curious. Probably they do. I'd like, that I was interested. I hope people think I was interesting. That might be nice. I hope I was kind. I hope people I hope when I am gone from this world, people can remember me and smile. And I hope I did something useful, even if it was something really small. Even if there were a few people's lives were changed by some research that I did, or a project that I was in, or I said something to someone and that inspired them to do something better. I don't think I have great hopes for these things. I think I would just like to hope that I made the world a slightly better place.
Great, but if we put that story in a book and publish it, what will you call this book?
Curious.
Great.
Curious.
It was a nice conversation, and we are grateful that you have been with us in the podcast, and thank you for being here, and also for a visit, and I hope that you visit Baghdad again. Thank you for this conversation, and the last word for you.
But thank you. It's been a real pleasure, a surprise, and a real pleasure. It's interesting being technically on the other side of the microphone, but thank you for inviting me. I'll look forward to listening to it, and I will definitely be back, and I will see you here again.
Thank you, and excuse my weak English.
Shukran. That's all my Arabic. Shukran.